guys, what are you doing? How is things going? So, welcome once again to the course on strategic trade and protectionism theories and policies, or theories and empirics on it. We have now landed into the session on measuring intra-industry trade. This is our 19th lecture, and we are explaining now the end of 4th week. So far we have discussed so many things, so many strategies based on classical to neoclassical and to modern. Now we are actually exploring the modern theory, modern theory of international trade, where we are actually catering to the modern realities, the modern complexities, the modern issues, which are very much essential in the present day's discussion of international trade. Now, in the previous couple of lectures, we have tried our best to understand the monopolistic competitive market and its connection with trade. So, and in that connection we discussed how monopolistic competition or the number of firms can able to differentiate the product. The differentiation of the product actually raise various scope for further change in the choices of consumers' preferences. So, which has actually raised many important dimensions for international trade. One such dimension of international trade, which is much better than the existing literature, is called intra-industry trade. And intra-industry trade, we have already discussed what is the need for it, what are the types of it, why it emerged, what are the historical note on it, what is the stand of India on it, and how the developing countries has emerged in this context. So, many gamut of information we already talked about. So, therefore, the last lecture must be on how to measure it, how to systematically measure it, what are the different empirics based on intra-industry trade. And so, therefore, this class is completely dedicated to understanding the measurement. So, therefore, I feel very privileged to explain this. Myself, Pratap Mohanty, faculty member at Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and working at present at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. So, I have already covered this session to the trainee, Indian Revenue Service servant trainee in Delhi, and also to some trade houses, explaining how intra-industry trade is connected to different forms of policy changes and regulation in the present day context. So, therefore, this will be more interesting to note, and further expectations on this aspect can be derived from the references. So, let me go into the deeper insights of the measures. So, what are the approaches then? What kind of approaches are actually followed so far? So, one by one, we have already explained this particular slide, but it is better to start with once again, because this has connection to the present today's lecture. So, we have said that in 2014, especially by Bakchi's article, which are followed based on HS 6 digit classification of industries of India, where they used Bakchi article used unit value dispersion criteria, following which GHM approach was developed. GHM stands for Greenaway, Hine, and Milner, who actually initiated the discussion on IIT in detail, intra-industry trade in detail, and GHM is very famous so far as discussion of IIT is concerned. Now, this GHM approach disentangles total IIT into horizontal and vertical directions, and actually more largely they divided into two types. The term it as high vertical stands for with a notation H VIIT, S VIIT, then what we wanted to emphasize here are the following. So, let me select the pen here to emphasize this VIIT. and also to LIIT, LVIIT. V stands for vertical intra-industry trade, L and H stands for high, and L stands for inferior. Now, why these cutoffs are divided, why these segments are divided? Only to identify where the country has leverage in procuring external benefit out of trade. It has been observed that based on the Bagche article 2014 published in 2014, based on 6 major Indian manufacturing industries over the period 1990 to 2013, where they observed that India's products which have been exported largely of IVIIT variety. So, IVIIT variety, which means majorly the products are of inferior in nature, and those are inferior by technological content on it. So, the technological content in that basket of exportable commodities are of major concern for India, because our still the terms of trade in the international basket, so far as within the industry is concerned, or within intra-industry trade is concerned, we are at marginal side. Similarly, while examining intra-industry trade, especially understanding the high quality, high end technological goods, especially from 2008 after the crisis period, slowdown, the subprime crisis which we have witnessed in the world, this has raised India's position better, and especially India's exports gained momentum from this period onwards, because India was not affected by the crisis, and India has taken better position on it. Now, in the last class we also explained how a number of industries those are trading in IIT in intra-industry trade. The data, as is mentioned earlier, that we are referring to the EPW article recently published, which calculated and estimated these results, and for Indian context they collected data from 1978 till 2012, whichever the data available in the WITS database, World Intellectual Trade Solution database. This talks about intra-industry trade is increasing, steadily increasing over time, but recently there has been little sluggish rate is little sluggish, but still it is positive, much better. So, number of industries on the vertical axis we have, where it is observed that near about 800 industries who are practicing intra-industry trade. So, what do you mean by this? I think for better example, for our clarity, let me refer oil sector, oil refineries, then precious metals, then there are some gems and jewelry segment. Those industries particularly have been largely taking inputs, the raw material, the crude form, and they refine it, process it, reprocess it and add value to it, and export it again, exported to the countries, to the other countries. So, this actually raises huge revenue for the government, and now the number of industries which are involved here is near about 800, which is quite good, and we are actually adding huge value. So, therefore, our input content in the export basket is very high, and so therefore, this segment is adding much higher value for our exports. Then what are the measurements? To understand very carefully, let me start with the most common common instrument of measurement called of IIT initially by Global and Lloyd, Grubel and Lloyd, they initiated in the year 1975, and they develop an index based on export and import basket, or they take a ratio of the net trade to the total exports, or the total trade, net trade divided by total trade, or the volume of trade. So, based on that they define the index. Now, why it is important? I have two slides to talk about on this particular matter. Now, let us start with this, then we will come back to the previous one and explain its subscript correctly. Now, the Grubel and Lloyd measure initially or observed by Balasa. We also discussed earlier Balasa that total volume of differentiated products increase within broad industrial classification. So, Balasa used the term IIT in 1966, even prior to the complete framework made by Grubel and Lloyd. So, Balasa's contribution is also significant, because he has used this term for the first time, whereas Grubel and Lloyd calculated an index. Therefore, the index name is actually attributed to Grubel and Lloyd, but Balasa initiated the term. So, calculated the and the term with the T component on it. Grubel and Lloyd calculate the T index, they term it as a T index for 10 industrial countries in 1967, and found the range between 30% to 66%. That they found the range of trade actually takes place between 30% to 66%. Now, what do you mean by this? The index I will explain. So, in look at 66 introduced, but the index was actually systematically calculated by Grubel and Lloyd. Therefore, Grubel and Lloyd index is more famous. Now, what it stands for? So, T stands for look at export and import. We have already presented the diagram earlier like this. This is from one country to another country, this is from another country to the first country. Now, if you say this is export and this is import, now if 100% of export are actually taken, but import is not from that segment. So, rather actually it is in another segment, that means the export is not containing any imports from another country. Now, here X stands for exports, M stands for imports. So, and here we are taking the mode value of it to neutralize the negative component of it, and which states that any sector which is composed of imports as well as exports, that means we are re-exporting with the imports as inputs. So, if it is 100%, for example, if it is here only we are exporting as well as importing 100%, that means this is equated to this, x is equal to m. So, this boils down to be 0. What do you mean by this? What is the interpretation of it? This states that when we are exporting with the help of imports, 100% imports from another country, we are actually adding no value addition after import from another country of the raw materials. So, this says that we are no adding, but our import content is almost 100%. So, our value addition is not there, but so far as intra-industry is concerned, it is 100%. Now, 100% we are getting it. So, this boils down to be 0, x minus m equal to 0. So, 0 divided by whatever the number export plus import, this segment is 0. So, 1 minus 0. So, T value stands for 1 when we have 100% intra-industry trade. So, T is equal to 1 if intra-industry trade boils down to 100%. Whereas, on the other extreme, if you are not actually importing or export in one sector or import in other sector, other than this particular exported sector, then exports are not equal to imports. Rather, so far as the same industry is concerned, export either equal to 0 or import equal to 0. Okay. So, export minus import is 0 or 0 minus import. So, both the possibilities are there. So, that leads to here in the if it is only export, no question of imports in that particular sector. So, that means only export by export, this boils down to 1. So, 1 minus 1 equal to 0, or if it is only of import, we are not adding value to it. If we are not adding value, then so m divided by m stands for I mean again m is absolute value, boils down to be only positive m, m plus m divided by m equal to 1, 1 minus 1. So, this 1 minus 1 equal to 0. So, t stands for another value called 0, extreme values we are referring to. So, when t stands for 0, what do you mean by that? Either only export or only import. So, what are the interpretation of only export or import? They state that the sector does not take imports, or if the sector taking imports is not re-exporting. So, that means there is no component of no single component of intra-industry, no within the industry trade is not taking place. So, when T stands for 0, it is actually there is no evidences of, or there is no single evidence of intra-industry trade. So, this is all about the interpretation. So, extreme value stands for T from 0 till 1. So, this is the extreme values of intra-industry trade. Let us come back to the previous slide where we started. Now, we are saying the global Lloyd T index, this can be also interpreted as T index like this. T index stands for 1 minus. So, let me interpret here the index for any particular product class I, this stands for I, between country A to B, between country A and B is defined as follows. So, now here x, a component like this is defined as x I should be here, x I A B is the value of exports of product class I. We are referring to a particular product class or a particular firm where I mean product class I by country A to B. So, exports are from country A to B. So, these are exports with product class I. So, this is called X, this is basically noted as X A B I, all right. Now, similarly imports, if it is A to B with the product class X I B. So, if I mention it like here, if it is X I here, M is here, X is here, then this is defined as imports of ith particular product categories from A to B, all right. Now, in the denominator they are the same number, we are just trying to find out when only a complete export plus import are there, this is called volume of trade. This is also called trade total openness of the country so far as of trade, openness of trade, so far as total trade is concerned, whereas x minus m is equal to net trade. So, these are the two important components we have already discussed. So, broadly I mean in a nutshell, we are basically trying to find out net trade divided by total openness, total trade, or trade openness 1 minus this. That means I mean how the net trade is a proportion of the total openness within the industry is all about the equation. So, the value of this index actually lies between 0 and 1, 0 and 1 which we have already discussed, including the two extreme values. So, this is what I have mentioned here, extreme values are also included, 0 and 1 both are included in the model. So, therefore, this is the foundation model of intra-industry trade, and this is the standard model of measuring intra-industry trade. But there are large number of limitations raised by other economists, those limitations are presented here. Now, we will actually extend these discussion in a detailed format in our next lecture, specifically identifying its shortcomings, its new I mean advanced models or updated models, then what are the updated models and how they contribute to the calculation of intra-industry trade, but at this moment let us understand the limitations. What we said here, simply we try to find out the balance, trade balances x minus m. We do not actually attach the trade imbalances. So, the first limitation is it does not take into account a country's trade imbalance. So, how we can able to emphasize if there is any possibility of trade imbalance. If trade imbalance, what do you mean by this? Either export is greater than import or import is greater than export. If these two things are there, but here what we take the mode value of it. So, basically it is always positive, is not it? So, export minus import, whatever the value comes, it boils down to a positive number after converting into a mode of it. So, therefore, the trade imbalances are not actually covered. So, this is one of the important limitations of global and Lloyd index of measuring intra-industry trade. So, there is no question of 100% trade balance between countries. So, and second one, it cannot distinguish between type of IIT, type of intra-industry trade. So, the categories, it simply says whether there is intra-industry trade or there is no intra-industry trade. So, or by its percentage. There are there are various interpretations. If the range varies from certain limit to other limit, then there are possibility of defining the types, but actually this is not clearly answering. So, type here we are referring to horizontal type or vertical type. I already said horizontal, where the characteristics or the features of the products are different within the firm, where in the vertical one there are characteristics are not different, they are by quality they are different. So, just by quality they are different. So, vertically one can rank those qualities very clearly. So, this is rank 1, this is rank 2, and we can have a clear hierarchy in the orderings of the product. Now, what is important here to overcome the first limitation, Buxton 1983 proposed an index which actually emphasize multilateral trade imbalances as per the following way. Now, we can look at this. Now, this seems little complicated, but can be understood in our next slide. We have another component we will talk about in a short while. So, what it includes? Component seems equal here like GL index, global and Lloyd index. Now, you also please remember one thing, this is initially emphasized by GHM approach. So, now later on by global and Lloyd specifically. Now, we are emphasizing on Buxton 1983 paper and emphasize another methodology. What this methodology stands for? Now, look at the average of this is taken at the begin with. Now, what is X A to B I? It is not just exports, it is the average of something, but multiplied by its own exports, multiplied by export, but average the world trade. Look at this, what is this in total? Total exports of the country A as in the denominator, exports of that country plus imports of that country A. So, total trade of the country out of the twice of the exports they have taken, plus what is the total trade in the world or by another country, where we are referring to A to B or in the B country, total trade out of their imports. So, whatever we export to that country, first segment is actually considered as what is our openness out of our exports plus what is their openness out of their total imports. So, from there we can infer one thing, what is the average openness so far as these two countries are concerned. So, average openness or average openness of both the countries and their trade imbalances can be captured very easily. Now, from here we will by multiplying the ratio, what is the average of it and what is the first country is exposed out of that ratio. So, is it actually, I mean this is the first component we have considered, and the second component stands for just the reverse, from country B to country A. From the country B, our concern is actually from imports to then export. I mean both the components are here, again exports, imports, there are openness and openness, both the components are actually mentioned here. Now, what we are multiplying here is very important, their export, we are actually multiplying their export to this average more or less are same, you can easily get it, this is 2xb, but the ratio they are taking differently. Now, the right component is nothing but the component in the first one, this component is nothing but the component of the first country, and this component is nothing but the component of the second country. So, the average more or less by ratio are same, whereas we are multiplying that ratio to the export of another country. So, we capture the export of another country and we subtract it then, and that will capture the trade imbalances correctly. Out of that, if we take the total as a ratio, we will find out the possibilities. Now, this is one of the suggestions submitted by Bergstrand to capture multilateral trade imbalances, because we are including in their total openness to their individual as a ratio of individual import and export respectively, and accordingly defining various instruments. We will actually talk about these technique in detail with its shortcomings, with its advantages, disadvantages in our next class. But at this moment, let us understand that global Lloyd index once again. This seems a bit complicated, but can be understood very clearly. The first equation which I said 1 minus x minus m divided mode of it x plus m, this is what we said. But now, if I just extend it further, x plus m, this is x plus m minus mode of x minus m. Okay. Now, this is nothing but this equation, and this is why this is not, this is also called uncorrected model because of the following reasons. Now, so let us see look at from these lines. GLU index is applied for measuring the IIT between developed and developing countries. Possibility of underestimation cannot be ruled out due to trade imbalance, which I have already discussed. Now, you know, to correct that aspect, some of suggestions are mentioned, even Bergstrand suggestions are also noted. Now, they included one thing little differently. Now, how they accounted it, this part is same. Now, they have included in the denominator of the net exports or the net trade. So, this is the total trade of that particular of the country minus the total imports, total exports minus total import divided. On the numerator it is same, numerator it is largely same, but then the denominator they take the ratio out of, I mean it's the net volume has also been subtracted. So, now it seems as if your here the denominator is extremely large, whereas here it is a net content to capture certain forms of trade imbalances, export minus import, and its value is also subtracted from it to capture the net volume of trade as well. Now, when we are looking at this, what it exactly captures? So, I mean how it gets interpreted, we will actually discuss in our subsequent slides. Here how basically we are trying to capture the horizontal intra-industry trade and vertical intra-industry trade. The detailed calculation will also follow in our next lecture, which is all about here mentioned as HIIT stands for similar in terms of quality, but have different characteristics or attributes we have already said. Discussed in different papers by Dixit and Stiglitz in 1977 paper, Lancaster 1980 paper, Krugman 80 and 81 paper. Helpman and Krugman concluded the larger is the difference in the factor endowment, smaller is the extent of HIIT or VIIT. So, larger is the difference in the factor endowment. if the differences is very huge, then the country will not actually trade, their overlapping content will be very less, because they will not depend too much on each other. Whereas in VIIT, vertical intra-industry trade, we said different in qualities which are not the same in terms of unit of production cost and factory intensities, emphasized by different papers mentioned here. Now, vertical, largely vertical intra-industry dominates over horizontal one in the present days, like Indian trade model baskets. Bilateral IIT level with respect to India's high income partners, while the same effect is not significant for low income countries, we have already mentioned. Now, looking at GLC and GLU, I have already said the corrected one as compared to uncorrected one. Uncorrected one, where on the denominator it is the total exports, I mean total openness, exports plus imports. So, the the volume or the value in the denominator is very huge. So, therefore, as a ratio it is low. So, therefore, it is always low. In case of corrected one, we are calculating the net part in the denominator as well. So, every time it is higher. Now, especially in the recent years, there has been a change, positive change towards. Now, India's overall IIT with rest of the world, figures are from 2001 to 2015. Now, here the table probably is not visible, but if you open my slide, you can read between the columns and line. Average shares of India's major trade partners with trade baskets. So, here exports, imports from 2001 to 5, 2006 to 10, 2011 to 15 are presented with different countries, and what is their export share, what is their import share of their trading partners, especially India's content from other countries are presented. So, accordingly we find different values, and it is useful for better interpretation. Similarly, India's IIT results for top trade partners are also important. Top trade partners we have presented here. Different negotiations are there with developed countries, with developing countries, and in developed countries like Australia, France, Belgium, we have already discussed who are the groups. You will please go through, and we may take it forward in our next lecture in detail. And these are just the interpretation we have already made, no need to repeat things. Largely this talks about Lancaster paper we have already discussed. I think rest of the details will continue with our discussion in the full fledged measurement lecture on intra-industry trade in the next class. With this, let me stop here. Thank you.